The moment I knocked on my aunt's front door, I could already hear it, the music, the laughter, the sound of my cousins running across hardwood floors. Someone was telling a joke inside. Someone else was pouring wine. I stood on the porch with my daughter Maya pressed against my side, her little mittened hand wrapped around two of my fingers, and I thought, this is it. This is finally the year things are different. I was wrong. The door opened about 6 inches. My Aunt Carol stood in the gap, one hand on the frame, the other still holding her champagne flute. She didn't open it any wider. She looked at me the way you look at someone who's shown up to the wrong address. Rachel. She said my name like it was a mild inconvenience. I thought we were clear. I blinked. Clear about what? Mom said Thanksgiving was at your house this year. She told me 7 o'clock. Carol glanced down at Maya, then back at me. Something moved across her face. Not guilt, not even discomfort. Just impatience. We're at capacity, she said. The table's full. You should have confirmed. Behind her, through that 6-inch gap, I could see the dining room. The long table my grandmother had owned for 40 years, the one with the claw feet and the leaf extensions, was set beautifully. Crystal glasses, the good china, candles. I counted at least 4 empty chairs. There are empty chairs, I said. Those are saved. Carol. Rachel, her voice dropped. Final. I'm sorry you made the drive. I really am. But this isn't a good time. She closed the door. Not slammed. That almost would have been better. She just quietly, firmly closed it, and I heard the latch click. And then I heard the laughter start up again inside like nothing had happened at all. Maya looked up at me. She was 5 years old. She had her father's dark eyes and my stubborn jaw, and she was wearing the dress we'd picked out together the week before, navy blue with a white collar, because she'd said it made her look like a fancy penguin. She was so proud of that dress. Mommy, she said, did they forget we were coming? I crouched down to her level right there on the porch, in the cold, and I looked at her face, and I felt something tear open somewhere behind my sternum. I think there was a mix-up, baby, I said. Let's go back to the car and get warm, okay? She nodded, very serious. The way 5-year-olds are when they're trying to understand something that doesn't make sense. We walked back down the front path. I buckled her into her car seat. I got in the driver's side and I sat there for a moment with my hands on the wheel, and I did not cry, because Maya was watching me in the rearview mirror and I refused to let her see that. I started the car. I pulled out onto the street. I had no idea where I was going. We'd driven maybe 8 minutes when my phone rang through the car speakers. The name on the screen made my breath catch. Grandma Dot. I pulled over into a gas station parking lot and answered. Where are you? Her voice was sharp. Not angry, something else. Alert. The way she got when she was paying very close attention. I'm in the car, I said. We didn't stay. Silence for a moment. Then, Carol turned you away. It wasn't a question. She said the table was full. Another silence. Longer this time. When my grandmother spoke again, her voice had changed in a way I hadn't heard since I was 17 years old, and a boy from school had done something that required her to make a phone call I was not allowed to be present for. Rachel, I need you to turn around right now. Bring Maya and come back. Park in the driveway, not the street. And don't ring the doorbell knock 3 times. Grandma, I don't think. 3 times, she repeated. I'll be waiting. She hung up. I sat in the parking lot of that gas station for 30 seconds. Maya was humming something to herself in the back seat, kicking her feet gently against the base of the seat. The little reindeer on her shoes lit up each time. I turned the car around. I want to tell you something about my grandmother before I go further, because she matters to this story in a way that's hard to explain unless you understand who she is. Dorothy Callahan is 78 years old, and she is the most quietly formidable person I have ever known. She raised 4 children, mostly on her own after my grandfather died young. She worked 31 years as an administrator at a county hospital. She never raises her voice. She never threatens. She simply decides what is right, and then she does it, and the world rearranges itself accordingly. She also has, in the front sitting room of her house, a secretary desk from the 1890s, a beautiful piece of furniture with a fold-down writing surface, and a dozen little cubbyholes and a small drawer that locks with an actual brass key she keeps on a chain around her neck. That desk has been in her family for over 100 years. She talks about it the way most people talk about living relatives. I mention this because the desk matters. It matters a great deal. I parked in the driveway. I took Maya out of her car seat and carried her around to the side door, the one that opens into the little mudroom off the kitchen, and I knocked 3 times. My grandmother opened it immediately. She was dressed for Thanksgiving. A deep burgundy blouse, pressed slacks, her hair pinned back. She looked completely composed except for her eyes. which were doing something I'd rarely seen them do. They were furious. She hugged me briefly, fiercely. Then she bent down and kissed the top of Maya's head. "There's my girl," she said. "Are you hungry? There's pumpkin bread in the kitchen. Mrs. Patterson made it." Maya's eyes went wide. She adored Mrs. Patterson's pumpkin bread. Grandma Dot led her into the kitchen and settled her at the small table there with a thick slice and a glass of milk. And then she turned to me and said, very quietly, "Come with me." We went into the front sitting room. She closed the door. She gestured for me to sit, and I sat on the little settee across from her chair, and I waited, because I had learned a long time ago not to rush Dorothy Callahan when she was gathering herself. "I'm going to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to hear all of it before you react." I nodded. 2 weeks ago, I noticed the desk had been opened. I knew immediately which desk she meant. The secretary desk. How could you tell? Because I am 78 years old, and I have been looking at that desk for most of my life, and I know where every mark and scratch on it is. The brass plate on the second cubbyhole from the left is slightly different than I left it. Someone had gone through it. She paused. "I keep certain documents in that desk, Rachel. Private documents, including the most current version of my will." I felt a cold feeling start at the back of my neck. "I didn't say anything," she continued. "I wanted to wait and see. I had a feeling about who had been in that room, but I needed to be certain." She looked at her hands for a moment, then back at me. "Your cousin Derek offered to help me organize some paperwork last month. He was very eager about it. Very helpful. Kept asking where I kept the important things. Derek, my Aunt Carol's son, 29 years old, recently unemployed, recently divorced, recently relocated back into his mother's house. He'd always been charming in the way that people are charming when they want something from you." "What was in the will?" I asked, and then immediately, "You don't have to tell me." "I want to tell you," she said, "because it's relevant." She folded her hands. "The previous version, the one from 4 years ago, divided my estate fairly evenly among all 4 of my children, with smaller amounts set aside for the grandchildren. This house, specifically, was to go to Carol because she'd expressed interest in it years ago, and I thought she would take care of it." Past tense. Thought. 6 months ago I changed it, my grandmother said. "I changed it because of something that happened at Easter that I saw, and no one knew I saw. I'll tell you about that another time. The point is, I changed it, and whoever went through that desk found the old version, and I believe they assumed nothing had changed." She stood up then, slowly, and smoothed the front of her blouse, and she looked at me with those still furious eyes. "You were turned away from this table tonight," she said, "in my house, at my table, that I have hosted Thanksgiving at for 34 years, without my knowledge and without my consent. Carol told me you'd said you weren't coming. She showed me a text message. I never sent." "I know," she said simply. "I know you didn't. Your number is in my phone, Rachel. I know what your texts look like. That wasn't your number." She picked up her own phone from the side table and showed it to me. The text, purportedly from me, canceling, had come from a number with 1 digit different from mine. 1 digit. Someone created a contact in my phone under your name with a slightly wrong number. I found it this afternoon when I went to call you and noticed the contact had been added 3 weeks ago. I didn't add it. The room was very quiet. "Grandma," I said. I didn't know what else to say. "I need you to go get Maya," she said, "and I need both of you to come into the dining room with me. And I need you to hold your head up and not say a single word until I'm finished speaking. Can you do that?" I said yes. We collected Maya from the kitchen, where she had eaten most of her pumpkin bread and was explaining something very elaborate to Mrs. Patterson about her penguin dress. I took her hand and we followed my grandmother down the hall to the dining room. The table looked exactly as it had through the gap in the door. Beautiful, candlelit, full of family. My mother was there, and Carol's husband, and Derek, and my other Aunt Susan and her husband, and 3 of my cousins. They all looked up when we walked in. The expressions moved through the room in a wave. Surprise. Confusion. And on Derek's face, something faster and harder that he shut down almost immediately. "Dot," Carol said, starting to rise. "I told you Rachel wasn't—" "Sit down, Carol." My grandmother's voice was pleasant. Absolutely, terrifyingly pleasant. Carol sat down. Grandma Dot pulled out the chair at the head of the table, her chair, the one she always sat in, with the slightly higher back, and she settled Maya into it with a gentleness that made my throat ache. She moved a candle so it wasn't too close. She came back to the sideboard and picked up a small envelope that had been sitting there, which I now realized had been placed there deliberately, waiting. "I want to say something before we eat," she said. Still pleasant, still calm, addressing the table the way she might address a board meeting. "We're going to have a wonderful Thanksgiving, Mrs. Patterson has made more food than 12 of us could eat, and I intend to enjoy every bite. But first, I need to address a few things, because they've been sitting with me all day, and I'm not willing to sit across from a turkey pretending they haven't. No one spoke. Maya was looking around at the adults with the frank curiosity of a 5-year-old who doesn't yet know that the air in a room can have a texture. Several weeks ago, my grandmother said, "Someone entered the sitting room without permission and went through my desk." I watched Derek. He didn't move. He was very, very still. "That desk has a small lock," she continued. "The key never leaves my person. But the lock on the writing surface itself, the fold-down portion, can be opened with a letter opener if you know how to apply pressure at the right point. Isn't that interesting?" Not a question, a statement. Her eyes moved briefly to Derek. "It's also interesting that the same week I noticed the desk had been disturbed, a small photograph went missing from inside it. A photograph of my late husband that I kept there specifically. It was the only copy I had." Carol said, "Mother, I'm sure no one." "I also want to mention," my grandmother continued without pausing, "that someone in this family and I will not say who, because I think that person knows. And I think perhaps others in this room can make their own conclusions, altered a contact in my telephone so that I would believe my granddaughter had canceled her plans to join us tonight. And that same person communicated to me on at least 2 occasions in the past month that Rachel seemed distant lately and probably wouldn't stay close as she got older." She looked around the table. "I've been managing people my entire adult life. I know a campaign when I see one." The silence had a weight to it now. "Rachel," my grandmother turned to me, "I owe you an apology for not catching this sooner. You have shown up to this table, in this house, every year of your life. When your father left, you were 12 years old, and you still set the table and helped me in the kitchen, and never once made me feel like it was a burden to be here. You put yourself through college while working 30 hours a week, and you have raised this beautiful child, and you have never once asked me for anything beyond a place at this table." Her voice didn't waver. "That is not distance. That is dignity." Maya, who had been quietly examining the centerpiece, looked up at the word beautiful and smiled without understanding the context, which somehow made it worse, and I felt my eyes fill with tears I absolutely refused to let fall. "Now," my grandmother said. She opened the small envelope. "I had intended to handle this privately, in January, with my attorney. But plans change." She took out a folded piece of paper. "This is a letter I wrote this afternoon. It outlines my intent to revise certain elements of my estate plan, and I have asked Mrs. Patterson to sign it as a witness, which she has done." She set it on the table, flat, where everyone could see it without being able to read it. "My attorney will receive a copy tomorrow morning. I wanted my family to know that the revision is happening, and that it reflects my actual wishes, not the wishes of anyone who believes they can rearrange my relationships for me." Derek pushed back from the table slightly. "Just slightly." The chair scraped. "The photograph," my grandmother said, looking at him directly for the first time, "is the only thing I want back. I don't need explanations. I don't need apologies right now. I need that photograph returned to my desk before this evening is over, or I will be making a phone call tomorrow that goes significantly beyond my attorney." The silence stretched for what felt like a full minute. Then Derek stood up, quietly, and left the room. No one followed him. No one spoke. We listened to his footsteps go down the hall, heard the front door open, heard it close. 3 minutes later, we heard it open again. His footsteps returned. He came back into the dining room and set a small photograph face down on the sideboard without looking at anyone, and then he went back to his chair and picked up his fork. My grandmother placed the photograph in her cardigan pocket. "Thank you," she said pleasantly. "Now, Susan, would you like to say grace?" I don't fully remember what I ate that Thanksgiving. I remember Maya insisted on sitting on my lap for part of the meal and fell asleep against my shoulder before dessert. I remember Mrs. Patterson's pie. I remember my grandmother pressing her hand over mine at one point, briefly, without saying anything. I remember that Derek and Carol left before coffee. My mother stayed to help clean up, and she didn't apologize to me. Not exactly, but she stood next to me at the sink and said, very quietly, I didn't know about the phone, and I believed her. My mother has never been brave, but she is not calculating. She had been managed too. When the kitchen was clean and Maya was asleep on the settee, wrapped in the blanket my grandmother kept draped over the back of it, Grandma Dot and I sat together in the front sitting room. The secretary desk was there, between us, lit by the lamp in the corner. What happens now? I asked. Now, she said, I make an appointment with my attorney, as I told everyone I would. I revise things in a way that reflects reality rather than the version of reality certain people have been trying to construct. She glanced at the desk, and I get a better lock. I laughed. I don't know where it came from, but it came, and it surprised both of us. And she laughed too, a real one. The kind she gave rarely, the kind that looked like my mother's and my own. Can I ask you something? I said. You can always ask. What happened at Easter? You said you saw something. She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the lamp. Then she said, I came downstairs early in the morning before anyone else was up to put the flowers in water. Derek was in this room. He didn't hear me come in. He was taking photographs with his phone of the documents in the desk. He didn't realize the lock hadn't engaged properly. She paused. He put everything back and left and never knew I'd seen. I closed the desk myself and locked it properly, and I spent 6 months deciding what to do about it. 6 months, I said. You knew for 6 months. I wanted to be fair, she said. I wanted to be certain I wasn't reacting from anger. Anger is a very good reason to wait. I thought about that for a long time on the drive home. Maya slept in the back seat, still in her fancy penguin dress, one mitten on and one lost somewhere in the house, and the highway was almost empty in that specific way it gets late on Thanksgiving, when everyone has already gone wherever they're going. I thought about my grandmother at 78 years old, sitting with knowledge like that for 6 months, not from weakness, but from precision, waiting until she was sure, waiting until the moment was right, never raising her voice, never tipping her hand, never letting anyone see how closely she had been watching. And I thought about what she'd said to me, the part I hadn't expected. You have never once asked me for anything beyond a place at this table. That is not distance. That is dignity. I had spent years feeling like an afterthought in that family. Years wondering what I had done wrong, what quality I was missing, why I always seemed to be outside looking in at something I couldn't name. I had told myself the story so many times that I'd started to believe it. I was the one who didn't quite fit. I was the absence at the table. But I hadn't been the absence. I had been the constant. I was the one who showed up every year, who helped in the kitchen, who called on birthdays, who asked how people were doing and actually listened to the answer. I had been so busy trying to figure out why I didn't belong that I hadn't noticed how thoroughly and deliberately I was being edged out, not because of anything I'd done, but because of what someone else wanted. That distinction, I realized, changes everything. 4 months later, the estate plan was finalized. My grandmother's attorney sent a letter confirming it. I am not going to describe the specifics, because this story was never about money, and I want to be careful that it doesn't become about that. What I will say is that the secretary desk, the one from the 1890s with the fold-down writing surface and the brass fittings and the drawer that locks with a key, will one day be mine. My grandmother told me this in February on the phone. Matter-of-factly, the way she says most important things. That desk has watched over 100 years of this family, she said. It should go to someone who will take care of it. I'll take care of it, I said. I know, she said. That's why I'm telling you. Maya, when I told her we might one day have a very old and important piece of furniture, thought about this carefully, and then asked if she could keep her crayons in it. I told her we'd see. She seemed satisfied with this. My Aunt Carol sent a text in March. It said she hoped there were no hard feelings, and that family was family. I read it twice. I put my phone down and I went into the kitchen, and I made myself a cup of coffee, and I thought about what I wanted to say and what I actually needed to say, which turned out to be less. I wrote back, "Of course. I hope you're well." I meant the second part. I did not particularly mean the first. But I have decided that some things are better left as intentions rather than arguments, and that forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing, and that you can wish someone well across a very large distance. The important thing, the only thing, really, is that on a Tuesday morning in November, my daughter and I stood on a porch in the cold and were told there was no room for us, and we turned around and drove away. And 8 minutes later, someone who loved us called and told us to come back, and we did. And there was room. There was room at the head of the table, in a chair that had hosted 34 years of Thanksgivings, and the candles were lit, and the good china was out, and Mrs. Patterson's pumpkin bread was in the kitchen. And my daughter sat in that chair, in her navy blue dress with the white collar, and looked around at the room, and said nothing, because she was 5 years old, and 5-year-olds don't narrate their joy. They just live inside it. That's what I think about when I think about that night. Not the door closing, not the cold, not the look on Derek's face or the weight of the silence when my grandmother said what she said. I think about Maya in that chair. I think about how she didn't know she was sitting at the head of a table that certain people had spent months trying to ensure she'd never see. How she had no idea that the room she was sitting in had been the subject of plans and manipulations and careful campaigns. How she just sat there with pumpkin bread and reindeer shoes and looked at the candles and thought, probably, that this was simply what Thanksgiving looked like. She was right. This is what it looks like. The rest of it was just noise.